Husband serves his own wife as a customer. What happens next will shock you. The small, dimly lit diner on the edge of town was a place where time seemed to stand still. The flickering neon sign outside buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow over the cracked pavement. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of grease and stale coffee. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug. It was the kind of place where people came to disappear, to blend into the shadows and forget the world outside. But tonight, the diner would become the stage for a horror that would leave everyone who heard the story questioning the very nature of reality. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight as the lone waitress, Claire, wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time. She was used to the quiet, the solitude, but tonight something felt off. The air was heavier, the shadows deeper, and the silence more oppressive. She glanced at the door, half expecting it to swing open at any moment. When it finally did, her heart skipped a beat. The man who walked in was familiar, too familiar. It was her husband, Daniel. But something was wrong. His eyes were hollow, his movements stiff, and his smile. It was all wrong. Claire felt a chill run down her spine as he took a seat at the counter, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Daniel. Claire's voice trembled as she approached him, her hands gripping the edge of the counter for support. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at work. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He just stared at her, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I'm here to see you, Claire. I've missed you. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't right. Daniel was never like this. He was always so full of life, so warm and loving. But the man sitting in front of her was a stranger, a cold, empty shell of the man she married. She forced a smile, trying to mask her fear. Well, it's good to see you too. Can I get you something? Coffee? A slice of pie? Daniel's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'll have whatever you're serving, Claire. But make it special. Tonight is a special night. Claire nodded, her hands shaking as she poured him a cup of coffee. She placed it in front of him, along with a slice of apple pie. Here you go. Enjoy. Daniel picked up the fork and took a bite of the pie, his eyes never leaving hers. Delicious, as always. You always did know how to take care of me, Claire. Claire forced another smile, but inside she was screaming. What was happening? Why was he acting like this? She wanted to run, to get as far away from him as possible, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. She watched in horror as Daniel continued to eat, his movements mechanical, his expression blank. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the diner grew unbearable. Claire's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Was this some kind of sick joke? Had Daniel lost his mind? Or was it something else, something far more sinister? She glanced at the clock, willing the night to end, but time seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, Daniel finished his pie and pushed the plate away. He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, and walked around the counter to stand in front of Claire. She took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. Daniel, what are you doing? Daniel reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands. His touch was cold, sending a shiver down her spine. I told you, Claire. Tonight is a special night. I have a surprise for you. Claire's breath caught in her throat. A surprise? What kind of surprise? Daniel's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. You'll see. But first, I need you to close your eyes. Claire shook her head, her fear turning to panic. No, Daniel. I don't want to close my eyes. Please, just tell me what's going on. Daniel's grip on her face tightened, his fingers digging into her skin. Close your eyes, Claire. Trust me. Claire's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she was paralyzed with fear. Reluctantly, she closed her eyes, her body trembling as she waited for whatever was coming next. The sound of the door opening made her jump, but Daniel's grip on her face didn't loosen. She heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from behind. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized they weren't alone. Someone else was in the diner. "Open your eyes, Claire," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. Claire's eyes fluttered open, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Standing in front of her was herself. It was like looking into a mirror, but the reflection was wrong. The other Claire's eyes were empty, her smile twisted into a grotesque imitation of her own. She was wearing the same waitress uniform, her hair styled the same way, but everything about her was off, like a poorly made copy. Claire's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. What is this? Who are you?" The other Claire tilted her head, her smile widening. "I'm you, Claire. Or at least, I will be soon." Claire's mind reeled, her thoughts spinning out of control. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare, a hallucination. But the cold, hard reality of Daniel's grip on her face told her otherwise. She was awake, and this was really happening. Daniel leaned in close, his breath cold against her ear. "You see, Claire, I've been planning this for a long time. I knew you'd never leave me, but I also knew you'd never truly be mine. So I found a way to make you mine forever." Claire's eyes darted between Daniel and the other Claire, her mind struggling to comprehend what he was saying. "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" Daniel's smile turned cruel, his eyes gleaming with a madness that made Claire's stomach churn. "I mean, Claire, that you're going to be replaced. This version of you, the one standing here right now, is going to disappear. And in your place, there will be a new Claire, one who will love me unconditionally, who will never leave me, who will be mine in every way." Claire's heart sank as the realization hit her. This wasn't just a nightmare. This was a carefully orchestrated plan, a twisted scheme to replace her with a copy, a puppet that Daniel could control. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Daniel. Please, don't do this. I love you. I've always loved you. You don't need to do this." Daniel's grip on her face tightened, his nails digging into her skin. "You don't understand, Claire. This is the only way. You'll see. You'll thank me for this." Claire's vision blurred as the other Claire stepped closer, her empty eyes staring into her soul. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she was powerless. The last thing she saw before everything went black was Daniel's cold, empty smile, and the twisted reflection of herself reaching out to take her place. Conclusion. When Claire woke up, she was lying on the cold, hard floor of the diner. Her head throbbed, and her body felt heavy, like she had been drained of all her strength. She sat up slowly, her mind foggy, her memories fragmented. She looked around, but the diner was empty. Daniel was gone, and so was the other Claire. She stumbled to her feet, her legs shaking as she made her way to the counter. The coffee pot was still warm, the pie sitting untouched on the plate. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. She glanced at the clock, but the hands were frozen in place, stuck at the exact moment Daniel had walked in. Claire's heart raced as she realized what had happened. She had been replaced. The other Claire was out there now, living her life, pretending to be her. And she was trapped, a prisoner in her own body, forced to watch as her life was stolen from her. But as she stood there, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror behind the counter, she noticed something strange. Her reflection wasn't moving. It was frozen, just like the clock. And then, slowly, it began to change. The eyes grew darker, the smile twisted, and the face, it wasn't hers anymore. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. She wasn't the real Claire anymore. She was the copy, the replacement. And the real Claire, she was gone, lost forever in the darkness. The sound of the door opening made her jump, and she turned to see Daniel walking in, his cold, empty smile plastered on his face. "Welcome home, Claire," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I've been waiting for you." Claire's heart sank as she realized there was no escape. She was trapped, a prisoner in her own life, forced to play the role of the perfect wife to a man who had stolen everything from her. And as she looked into Daniel's eyes, she knew that this was only the beginning. The horror was far from over. Part 2. Husband serves his own wife as a customer, What happens next will shock you. The days blurred together in a haze of fear and confusion. Claire, or the thing that used to be Claire, struggled to maintain the facade of normalcy. She went through the motions, serving customers at the diner, cooking meals at home, and pretending to be the loving wife Daniel expected her to be. But inside, she was screaming, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Every night, she would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with questions. What had happened to the real Claire? Was she still out there, somewhere, trapped in the darkness? Or had she been erased, her existence wiped away like a bad memory? And what about the other Claire, the one who had taken her place? Was she still out there, living her life, pretending to be her? Claire's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest, as Daniel walked in, his cold, empty smile plastered on his face. "Good morning, Claire," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I hope you slept well." Claire forced a smile, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the bed. "Good morning, Daniel. I slept fine." Daniel's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Good. I have a surprise for you today. I think you're going to like it." Claire's heart sank as she realized what was coming. Daniel's surprises were never good. They were always twisted, cruel, designed to break her spirit and remind her of her place. But she had no choice. She had to play along, to pretend that everything was fine, even though she was dying inside. Daniel led her to the diner, his grip on her arm tight enough to leave bruises. The place was empty, as usual, the flickering neon sign casting an eerie glow over the cracked pavement. Claire's heart raced as she realized what was about to happen. Daniel was going to force her to serve herself again, to confront the twisted reflection of herself that had taken her place. But when they walked in, the diner wasn't empty. Sitting at the counter was Claire. Or at least, something that looked like her. The other Claire's eyes were empty, her smile twisted into a grotesque imitation of her own. She was wearing the same waitress uniform, her hair styled the same way, but everything about her was off, like a poorly made copy. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. Daniel was going to force her to serve herself, to confront the twisted reflection of herself that had taken her place. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she was powerless. Daniel's grip on her arm tightened, his nails digging into her skin. "Go on, Claire," he whispered, his voice cold and cruel. "Serve her. She's your best customer, after all." Claire's hands trembled as she approached the counter, her mind racing with fear and confusion. She poured a cup of coffee, her hands shaking so badly that she spilled some on the counter. She placed the cup in front of the other Claire, along with a slice of apple pie. "Here you go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Enjoy." The other Claire tilted her head, her empty eyes staring into her soul. "Thank you, Claire," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of her own. "You always did know how to take care of me." Claire's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she was powerless. She was trapped, a prisoner in her own life, forced to play the role of the perfect wife to a man who had stolen everything from her. As the days turned into weeks, Claire's fear and confusion grew. She began to notice strange things, little details that didn't add up. The clock in the diner was always stuck at the same time, the hands frozen in place. The customers who came in were always the same, their faces blank, their eyes empty. And the other Claire. She was always there, watching her, waiting for her to slip up. Claire's mind began to unravel, her thoughts spinning out of control. She started to question everything, even her own existence. Was she real? Or was she just a copy, a puppet that Daniel could control? And if she was a copy, what had happened to the real Claire? Was she still out there, somewhere, trapped in the darkness? Or had she been erased, her existence wiped away like a bad memory? One night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Claire made a decision. She couldn't go on like this, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She had to find a way to escape, to break free from Daniel's control and reclaim her life. But how? She was powerless, a prisoner in her own body, forced to play the role of the perfect wife to a man who had stolen everything from her. But then, she remembered something. Something small, something insignificant, but something that gave her hope. The other Claire. She wasn't perfect. There were little things, tiny details that didn't add up. Her smile was always a little too wide, her eyes a little too empty. And sometimes, just sometimes, she would slip up, say something that didn't quite make sense. Claire's heart raced as she realized what she had to do. She had to find a way to expose the other Claire, to prove that she wasn't real. If she could do that, maybe she could break free from Daniel's control and reclaim her life. The next day, Claire put her plan into action. She watched the other Claire closely, looking for any sign of weakness, any hint that she wasn't real. And then, she saw it. The other Claire was serving a customer, her movements stiff, her smile too wide. And then, she slipped up. She said something that didn't make sense, something that only the real Claire would know. Claire's heart raced as she realized what she had to do. She had to confront the other Claire, to expose her for the fake she was. But as she approached the counter, her hands trembling with fear and excitement, Daniel appeared, his cold, empty smile plastered on his face. "Claire," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "What are you doing?" Claire's breath caught in her throat as she realized she had been caught. But she couldn't back down now. She had to see this through, no matter what. I was just talking to her," she stammered, her voice trembling. "She said something. Something only I would know." Daniel's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, Claire. You still don't understand, do you? She is you. And you are her. There is no difference." Claire's heart sank as she realized the truth. Daniel had planned this all along. He had created the other Claire to replace her, to take her place in every way. And there was no escape. She was trapped, a prisoner in her own life, forced to play the role of the perfect wife to a man who had stolen everything from her. But as she stood there, staring into Daniel's cold, empty eyes, she realized something. She wasn't powerless. She still had her mind, her thoughts, her memories. And as long as she had those, she could fight back. She could find a way to break free, to reclaim her life, no matter what it took. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Claire made a decision. She would play along, pretend to be the perfect wife Daniel expected her to be. But she would also watch, wait, and plan. She would find a way to expose the other Claire, to prove that she wasn't real. And when the time was right, she would strike, taking back her life and her freedom. But as she drifted off to sleep, her mind filled with visions of the other Claire, her empty eyes staring into her soul, she couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was always one step ahead. That no matter what she did, she would never truly be free. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, Claire's fear and confusion grew. She began to notice strange things, little details that didn't add up. The clock in the diner was always stuck at the same time, the hands frozen in place. The customers who came in were always the same, their faces blank, their eyes empty. And the other Claire, she was always there, watching her, waiting for her to slip up. But Claire refused to give up. She would find a way to break free, to reclaim her life, no matter what it took. And as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she made a promise to herself. She would never stop fighting, never stop trying to escape. Because no matter how dark the night, no matter how deep the shadows, there was always a glimmer of hope. And as long as she had that, she would never give up. The end.